Hello, I'm Professor Gerwyn Griffiths of the University of Glamorgan. I'm here with Dr. Italo Ellul and Dr. Annalise Micallef to discuss the issue of foundations in Malta, which are certainly causing great interest at the moment. Italo, since 2007, foundations have been included in the list of tools that can be offered to investors when considering the Maltese legal system. Am I correct in making this statement?
Being typical of civil law countries, foundations have in fact existed for a long time in Maltese legislation. However, they were mentioned sporadically in certain laws. However, in 2007, Malta has promulgated detailed legislation relating to foundations and under instruments such as, for example, associations. Now, we find essentially two types of foundations. We have the private foundation, which is meant to cater for the needs of families, of private families. Then we have also got the possibility of setting up a purpose foundation, which is basically a foundation having a social purpose, for a social reason. Unlike in other jurisdictions, however, such as, for example, Denmark and Switzerland, foundations cannot operate commercially. There are, in our legislation, certain exceptions, which mainly relate to the passive holding of assets. Maltese law is quite exhaustive in that it does now cater for all the requirements that would be required for the setting up, for the valid setting up of a foundation under Maltese law. It also creates a certain element of certainty and also provides for the registration of a foundation with the Registrar of Legal Persons. Anybody setting up a foundation in Malta, mainly the founder and the administrators of the foundation itself, now know exactly what the duties and the responsibilities are in terms of law.
Annalise, a simple question, but I suspect not a simple answer. What is a foundation?
Foundations in themselves are ad hoc instruments within the Maltese legal system which bear similarities, however, to other legal institutes which exist in the Maltese legal milieu. So basically, foundations, we can say, bear similarities to trusts, for example, and also they bear similarities in certain ways to corporate structures and to partnerships which can be set up in terms of Maltese law. Albeit it's very important to point out that in terms of Maltese law, we cannot have the foundation being set up for a commercial purpose, as has already been reiterated by Italo in his previous elaboration on the topic. Different from trust, however, we're looking at a structure, the foundation, which does not have a separate legal personality. So if we compare, by way of example, a trust and the foundation, we juxtapose them, we're looking at the foundation which, on registration requirements being fulfilled, can be imbued with separate legal personality. Something which would, of course, be anathema to what would be applicable in the case of a trust. In the case of a trust, the focus is on the trustee and the ownership vesting in the trustee, whereas structurally in a foundation, there is the patrimonial nature of the estate, of the foundation itself, which is given primacy. Also, by way of example, in the case of a foundation, we could have the founder having a more active role in the administration of the foundation itself than would be co-natural to the scenario in the case of a trust. In the case of a trust, we risk having a sham trust, by way of example. So, in the case of a foundation, it is implied the founder himself can be actively involved in the administration of the foundation. So these are just examples of how we are looking at institutes which are similar but not quite the same. So why would a client, an investor, opt to go for a trust and not for a foundation? Basically, by analyzing the intent of the client or the investor, the quo, we would understand which structure, bearing in mind the nuances which are particular to each, and I've only given a snapshot of particular nuances which are applicable in one context and not in the other. So basically, by understanding what the client is after, we would see which structure best suits his intent.
What are the most typical instances where the option of setting up a foundation is considered advisable?
So in the context of Maltese law, we're looking at two types of foundations. We have the private foundation option and the purpose foundations. In the context of private foundations, these are essentially attractive estate planning tools insofar as the founder can set up a foundation which operates inter vivo, so during his lifetime, or else on the contingency of his demise, causa mortis, for the benefit of predetermined beneficiaries. We're looking at a context where the assets would be placed in the foundation and they would have an existence of their own, independently from the estate and from the assets of the founder and from the administrator. On the other hand, looking at the purpose foundations, these are essentially charitable, philanthropic or other social purposes which are being fulfilled via the setting up of this foundation. We're looking at a non-profit organization which is set up to fulfill these lawful purposes. One can mention that this really reflects the historical evolution of the foundation looked at along the years. So historically, the foundation has been perceived as an altruistic institute, and it is only along the years that it has evolved for a more private scope. So the Purpose Foundation really reflects, is a remnant of the evolution of the institute. In terms of Maltese law, we can also refer to the voluntary organizations. So provided the foundation fulfills the requirements which are prescribed in terms of the law governing voluntary organizations, basically, the foundation fulfilling a lawful purpose, operating as a non-profit making entity and being independent from government, the foundation may make public collections and receive grants or sponsorships and other financial aid from government. So basically a foundation can also operate as a voluntary organization provided it fulfills the criteria to operate as such. What would be the benefit of being considered a voluntary organization? One can say, for example, that a voluntary organization can benefit from certain entitlements and also certain benefits which are laid down in terms of law, for example, in relation to receiving grants and financial aid from government and also to benefit from policies supporting the voluntary action. Another point which we could mention is that even though the natura, the foundation, is not meant to fulfill a commercial purpose, it is not anathema to the way the voluntary organization would work to have a structure whereby we set up a foundation which is a voluntary organization and there would be linked to this voluntary organization a separate legal entity which is operating in a commercial context which is supporting the activity of the voluntary organization. So really, it is important to go for the proper structure to fulfill the needs of the clients in view of what they have in mind to set up by opting for the really colourful tools and instruments the Maltese law has to offer.
I think that brings us to a conclusion. Thank you very, very much, both of you, for the information. I certainly found it very, very helpful indeed. I'm sure that the same will go for our viewers. Thank you.